Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton,
And I'm Robin.
and we're here to do another episode of Breadcrumbs.
Finally.
Finally, it's been a couple months since
been
we've
a
done one
while.
of these. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was traveling in New Zealand for 3 weeks.
Then recovering from
For about
traveling.
3 weeks. So,
Here we are.
so we are starting off the new year, 2025, with a Breadcrumbs episode. And okay, Robin, we're going to go on record. We're going to commit to doing these more often on a regular basis.
Are we?
Yes, we are.
One of the things that we really try not to do is to just do an episode or a podcast because it's time to do an episode or a podcast. We really want to have something nutritious to say, even though it's not a huge meal. They're breadcrumbs. We want them to lead people to the table. And I think that happened this week. We started to talk about this thing that kept coming up over and over in conversation and in our reading, and that's the subject of bricks and stones.
Bricks and stones.
I know that sounds odd, but we just kept approaching it from different directions, and we started to realize this must be what we should talk about.
Well, we also plan to do another breadcrumbs on threads and shoe latches.
Well, that's a later conversation.
But that's a later conversation. So we have some very odd conversations around
bricks
here.
and stones.
Bricks and stones, yes. So you were the one who initially suggested this topic. So won't you share a little bit about how this came to be something that occupied your thoughts?
It started to occupy my thoughts, Grant, because I was thinking about how the enemy works versus how our King wants our life to be lived. And when we were in Egypt under oppression with the Pharaoh, with our enemy, he, from an external compulsion, makes us feel like we have to produce bricks in order to survive, because really that is our survival.
Just dead works.
It's dead works. And you're never really building anything that makes your life richer or better. You're building, but you're not building your life. You're building for something else.
Yeah, right.
And it's exhausting and it leads to death. And then he leads the people away from slavery. We know the story, that beautiful Exodus story. And he leads them into the wilderness, and there are no more bricks.
Right.
There's no more brick making.
No more brick.
And there is another kind of encounter they have with a rock.
Right. Well,
And
you know
so
what?
we'll get there.
Yeah. And as you're just talking, I was reminded of what it says about Abraham in Genesis, that when he left Haran, it says he took the souls that he made in Haran. God is interested in making souls.
Yes.
And yet the enemy would have us just make bricks, just stuff made out of the dirt. But God wants us to make people, make disciples, make souls. And in Proverbs is the one that says that he who makes or wins souls is wise. And that's in Proverbs. You'd think that'd be in the New Testament scriptures. But the scriptures are all about us making souls.
And when we talk about brick making, that can seem a little vague. But when I think about a life of brick making, or an existence of brick making, because it isn't true life, it's a life where things might seem predictable, but they're also created in a form that is external and imposed, and the edges are jagged and you can't go outside the lines, and it's fear motivated.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, bricks, if you have a brick house, each one of those bricks is like every one of the other bricks.
They need to be, or the house looks wrong.
And so they're made in a mold. They're thrown into a mold, smashed down, allowed to dry, then they're fired, and they all look alike. They're all clones of one another.
And there's no individuality.
Exactly. But God doesn't want bricks. He wants us to be living stones, where each one is shaped not by an external mold, but it's shaped by a stonemason, shaped by one who keeps chipping away, removing something here, something there, reducing the size, giving it shape, until finally, over a period of time, the stone is complete.
You know, when I was thinking about bricks versus stones, it occurred to me, and I smiled to myself, there were no bricks in Eden.
No.
But there are precious stones mentioned.
Right.
And Egypt isn't the first time brick making is mentioned, is it? Or, I'm sorry, Egypt.
No, no. In fact, let's go back to the beginning and find the first place bricks are mentioned. Now,
Because this
stones,
is really important.
yes, the first mention of stone is in Eden. And it talks about how the shoham stone was, the precious shoham stone was found there. But the first mention of brick and the second mention of stone is in Genesis chapter 11. And it tells us about how the people were all of one language. They settled in the land of Shinar. And verse 3, they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. So brick is mentioned twice there. And bricks were a substitute for stone. Stone takes too long.
The word that comes to mind, Grant, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's uniformity.
Uniformity. And this all happens under the dictatorship of Nimrod. And I love the statement by Rabbi Manus Weinberg. He said Nimrod was the patron saint of uniformity. He was the first world dictator, and he wanted everybody to be the same, everybody to be poured out of the same mold. And let's just make everyone conform, everybody be the same. And that is often how a society is built. That's how tyranny works. That's how socialism works. Equity. Let's make everybody exactly the same.
Well, here's the thing. It's also the way religion works.
It is, unfortunately. Not only do we see the world's first dictatorship, we see the world's first religion here in Genesis 11.
Because here's what happens. Once the people did leave Egypt and they were no longer forced to make bricks in order to survive, they tended to revert to that brick-making mentality when God wanted to lead them with other means, with an unpredictable living means.
Yes.
The pillar of fire.
A personal connection with Him.
The cloud, that unpredictable wind of His Spirit, and that makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah. And when you make something out of bricks, it's staying put. It's staying in that one place. It doesn't move anymore. But this is what's interesting in chapter 11. They say two things. First of all, come let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And so they use brick for stone and tar for mortar. But it doesn't say what they're going to do with them. And then the second statement is in the next verse, verse 4. Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. You know, those two verses describe the two phases of every movement that starts off sometimes in a kind of a positive direction with a positive feeling, but then it goes south. It's like, first of all, let's all do the same thing. Let's all congeal into a society with one aim.
And here's the thing. Unity is a good thing, right?
But uniformity is a bad thing.
Right.
Unity is when you have diversity that comes together in harmony. But when you have uniformity where everybody is exactly alike, then you have tyranny.
Yes.
So here the people, just like, let's all make these bricks. Let's do the same thing. But now let's make a tower that will reach to heaven, and we'll make a name for ourselves. And unless we're scattered. In other words, it went from a project they're working together to do together to self-preservation. And whenever we get to the point where instead of we're looking towards accomplishing a goal to just self-preservation, then we're done. Stick a fork in it, we're finished.
Yeah.
And what we're to be doing is always growing, developing. And but the people in Shinar, they, again, under Nimrod, it was all uniformity and not unity. So God came down, and what's interesting, it says that God is not the author of confusion.
Exactly.
And yet
But what did he
came down
do?
and confused the languages and scattered the people.
Yeah.
Because what they were trying to do was not good.
Right.
Now,
right.
with that said, when we get towards the end, there is a city that God wants to make. It's a city made from stone. And
it's the ultimate one.
It's the ultimate one.
Right.
But it's made out of living stones, not dead bricks.
Right. So we'll plant a little curiosity
Yes.
for a few minutes. And I think we've emphasized the fact that you and I have seen how it's clear Stones are made by God. Bricks are made by man.
Right. And they're made out of clay. They're made out of dirt. They're made out of the same stuff we're made out of.
Yes, yes. So as I was thinking more about this theme, obviously you have to go to Isaiah 28 because there's something important that God speaks to his people in verse 16. And we'll just read this, Grant, and then we'll go from there. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly or precious cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. He who believes in the stone will not be disturbed or not be striving or in a hurry, is the rendering of that language. How fascinating is that?
Yeah. And then this stone is not a physical stone, is it? It's spiritual. And we have to always remind ourselves that physical things are temporary. They're the misty, foggy, temporal things that pass away. And so bricks are a picture of that. But this stone, the permanent things, are the spiritual things. And this stone, of course, is Messiah, Yeshua. And quoting this verse in 1 Peter 2:4, Peter says, and coming to him as to a living stone, rejected by men, but choice and precious in the sight of God. So we're talking about a stone here that is unshakable, that is eternal, and we are to believe in him, as it's said in the verse you quoted from Isaiah 28:16. We're to believe in this stone and put our faith in this stone.
Well, here's something we don't want to miss. It's not just any kind of stone, but it is the primary cornerstone that is essential for a firm foundation. As a stonemason places a cornerstone, explain why that's important.
Well, when you start to build a building, you have to start somewhere. And they start with the cornerstone. Because that cornerstone has to be perfectly level, and it has to be aligned because everything else about that building is going to be determined by where is that stone facing. It's going to be, the width and the length of this building are going to be determined by where that cornerstone is. And the proper orientation of everything else and the level of everything else depends on that first stone. So that cornerstone better be perfect and strong and set exactly in the right place, or else the entire building is going to be wrong.
And the thing that I kept thinking about over and over this last week is that when that stone or Messiah was rejected or is rejected, he's rejected by builders who understand the importance of a cornerstone.
Yeah, it says he's the stone that the builders rejected.
Yes.
And I think it's because he wasn't conforming to their idea.
And they are experts in the things that offended them about him.
Yes. And we can all be the same way. We're all to be building on a foundation. But oftentimes we reject the stone that God has set there for the cornerstone to determine everything else. And the reason I think that happens, and it goes back to Egypt again. We read in Genesis about how Nimrod wanted to build this tower in a city to make a name for themselves, to keep them together for self-preservation. But the next big brick-making section of the Bible is in Exodus chapter 1. And it tells us there that Pharaoh enslaved the people of God to make these bricks.
Right.
This is something that Nimrod didn't do. But here, Pharaoh's making slaves. He's doing it out of fear. And he's building it to build a name for himself. Because it says they built these storage cities. That's in chapter 1, verse 11. They built these storage cities. And it says that Pharaoh was fearful of the people. He says, let us deal wisely with it. He refers to people as an it.
Because that's what we become.
Yeah, they become an object. Or else it will multiply. And in the event of war, it will also join themselves with the enemies, with those who hate us.
Once again.
And fight against us and depart from the land.
Yes, individuality and identity is removed.
So they appointed taskmasters over it to afflict it with hard labor,
Wow.
and it built Pharaoh's storage cities. And
then he not only requires them to make these bricks and they become it for him, but he makes it even less doable by removing straw.
right.
And that's a pattern.
Oh, yeah.
The enemy overplays his hand every time that he pulls us into this grinding way of life. And at first, it feels like it's working.
Yeah.
And then it might even be pleasurable.
Yeah.
It might even bring us that satisfaction we think we're seeking. And then he takes the straw away, but we have to keep producing the bricks.
Well, the straw was the only living part of the brick
Yeah.
because it grows on
Right.
the ground. So he removes the only thing that had any life attached to it, to where now he doesn't supply even that. But I think in all these details, because there's so much going through my mind, one of the things I really want to emphasize about this is that we are to be living stones, not bricks.
Amen.
And whenever we feel we are in a group where we're being forced to conform, to wear a uniform, to behave in a certain way, to say certain things, to be all alike, to become a tower that reaches to heaven, it's time to be scattered.
Yeah.
Because what God does, he doesn't pour us into a mold. But again, he is the stonemason who hand shapes each one of us individually. One of the things that I would like to correct in every single Bible, if I could, is this misconception that Yeshua was a carpenter. He was not a carpenter.
Of wood.
Yeah. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all refer to him being a carpenter. Matthew and Mark refer to him being a carpenter. And it says, is not this the carpenter that Tectone, the son of Mary and brother of James? That's in Mark 6:3. Well, that word Tectone is the word that means a builder, simply a builder. And of course, when King James in 1611 in England had this translated, the translators looked around and says,
Buildings
well,
were wood.
our buildings are all
Yeah.
made out of wood.
So we impose our culture on it.
So carpenters make
Right.
buildings, so Yeshua was a carpenter. Apparently, none of them had ever been to the Middle East because buildings there are not made out of wood. They're made out of stone. Yeshua was a stonemason, which only makes sense because we are living stones that he is building into a living edifice. And we are all being shaped by hand by the stonemason himself.
Okay, let's stop right there. How does a stonemason shape a stone? By adding material or by
Chipping away.
chipping away? And that's the pain and the pressure that we tend to go through,
Right.
so that he can build us
Yes.
into something that really, really is according to his plan.
Right. Now think about a brick. You have a mold.
So different.
Somebody made a mold. So you just slam the clay in there, press it down, let it dry. You take it out of the mold, you got into the brick like every other brick. But with a stonemason, he has to see that stone and say, okay, I can make something out of this. And he has an image of in his mind for that particular stone.
Right.
And he begins to chip away, chip, chip, just keeps hammering away. It takes time. Brick you can make in just seconds. But with a stone, it takes time and effort, and there has to be a plan in the mind of the master builder of what this stone's to look like. And I think of the tabernacle. You know, you could melt down metal and pour it into a mold, but God is very clear in his instructions to Moses.
It was hammered out from one piece.
Right.
Everything, even the menorah.
The menorah and the cover for the ark, you had to hammer it out. Tap, 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 tap.
Yeah.
You didn't make a mold and just pour it in. Now, the golden calf was made out of a mold. It was a molten calf. You make a mold, throw it in, there it is, out pops a calf. God says, that's not how I roll. And this is, I think, what Paul's saying in Romans 12, 1 and 2. Because, and we all know this passage so well. It says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world. Don't be poured into the mold. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. How long does the renewal of your mind take?
A lifetime.
A lifetime. Tap, 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 right?
Yes.
That by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. God is in He's in the process of making souls, making each individual soul.
It's so beautiful. And the other thing that occurs to me while you're describing this tap, 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 because we've all experienced it and it gets annoying and we want to resist it, but it's so important. But there's another way that stones and rocks can be worn down over time, and that's by water.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes there's a gentler force in our
Yes.
life. That living water flows, and it can become the way that our lives can be molded and shaped. You know, Grant, in Ephesians 2, it tells us that we have been brought close. We were once strangers and aliens, but now we're part of his household. And it says, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Messiah himself is our cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being fitted together, is growing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of God in the Spirit. That's the whole point.
There it is.
That's the whole point. Here's the problem. When he decides where to place us and how to place us in a living, breathing building,
Right.
that's something that isn't dead and predictable, it can be uncomfortable, not only because the tap, 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 tapping, but because of the way he puts us next to a stone
That we don't like.
that we don't want to be next to.
Yeah.
But he places us,
Yes.
doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine building a building out of stones?
And they're all moving
And they're all alive and they're all squirming.
and fighting back,
Yeah, and complaining, and
which is what we do.
which is what we do. And yet, you're talking about different ways of shaping stone. We are all shaped by the stones that surround us too.
We are.
The people around us shape us. You and I have shaped one another. And the people that God brings into our lives help chip away at our souls, shape our souls, smooth parts of our souls, and help us become the people we're supposed to be. It's an amazing process he has us in.
Have we talked about the stone that followed the people through the wilderness?
No, we haven't.
That's really important.
Yes.
Once they left that life of slavery,
Right.
talk about unpredictable and unexpected, the word describes the most peculiar thing.
Right. Well, in Exodus, we're told that the people started whining because there was no water. And
As we do.
So God told Moses, well, take this stone and I want you to smack it with your staff. And when he did, water came out. That's in Exodus 17, verse 6. And then Paul tells us an amazing thing over in 1 Corinthians 10. You know, the Midrash Rabbah says that stone didn't just provide water for them that one instance, but that stone continued to roll through the wilderness for 40 years, providing water. It's a constant source of water.
I remember the first time I read that, I thought, how did I miss that?
Yeah.
That is...
Well, that's in the Midrash Rabbah. That's not in the Bible.
Okay, but when I read that, about that,
yes.
I thought that is the most amazing thing.
Well, Paul obviously believed it because in 1 Corinthians 10, he talks about verse 1, I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were immersed in Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and get this, verse 4, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Messiah.
Wow.
And in Deuteronomy, we're given information about this rock. We're told it was made from flint.
Flint. Now, why does that matter?
Well, the word for flint in Hebrew is machalish. And in that word, you can rearrange the letters, and it spells Mashiach.
That's amazing.
Yes. So no wonder Paul saw in that Kalamish is flint, but you can rearrange the letters to spell La Mashiach, which means to the Messiah or for the Messiah.
So we'll never look at rocks quite the same.
No.
You know, in 1 Peter 2, it describes how it is that the stone that is our cornerstone and our foundation and our life force becomes offensive. And in verse 8, it says, we stumble, or they stumble, because of disobedience to the word. And I guess that boils it down to the nitty-gritty of what happens when we no longer feel comfortable being placed in a living building by the king, by the master, by the stonemason. We want to squirm away and do things our own way.
We do. And in that context of us not being conformed to the world, but being transformed from the inside out, is in the context of being a living sacrifice. And in other words, I need to decide I'm not going to be doing things my own way anymore. I don't want to do what's right in my own eyes anymore. I'm going to sacrifice my tendencies and my way of doing things to say, Father, how do you want it done? What do you want to do? And his idea is always better than mine, because his thoughts are higher than my thoughts, and his ways are so far above my own.
Well, I love the language in 1 Peter 2, Grant, because later, as a contrast to the slavery that we described, that Pharaoh imposes upon the people and forces them to become brick makers, verse 16 says, act as free men. And then don't use your freedom as a covering for evil. That's what religion does.
Yeah.
That's when we revert back to brick making.
Yes.
It says, but use it to be bond slaves of God. And here's how we know if that is happening. This is what it looks like. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king.
Yes. Yeah, the slaves that Pharaoh had heavy taskmasters over them, or taskmasters over them that put heavy burdens on them. And if the slave died, they just kicked the body to the side and keep on making those bricks. But a bondservant that's mentioned here is a bondservant because he says, I love my master. I don't want to be free. I want to serve him. And that's described for us in Exodus. So a bondservant was quite different. This
and
is
it's
one
not
who
a
loved his
life
master.
it's not a life of doing nothing.
No.
But it's not a life of striving.
Right. And you love someone whom you trust as being wiser,
Right.
and brighter and more intelligent, and loves you back. And so you want to serve him. You want to promote his program.
You know what this comes down to? It comes down to living a life of fear versus love.
Yeah.
It always comes down to that, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So if we're wondering, am I living a life like a slave or as a free person? What is my foundation? I guess the best question to ask myself is, are my thoughts right now motivated and filled with fear and urgency, or is it motivated by love and peace?
Yes.
Because our master invites us to rest.
Yes.
Because he's holding us up.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
doing the building. He's
That's
doing
right.
the
Yeah.
chipping away. We don't have to
Yeah.
worry about it. It's going to happen the way it needs to happen.
And if we're going to be living stones, I want to be I want to be a stone that it knows what shalom is.
Yes.
And surrounded by stones who are at peace and at rest with how God has made them and where God has placed them.
Yes.
And they're simply doing what God's given them to do.
And I do that about 1 minute out of a day, but it's a wonderful minute.
It is.
And I'm trying to expand that to more minutes. And that's what we need to do as his people,
Yeah.
to remind each other and to encourage each other of how life can be and should be.
Yeah.
We mentioned the ultimate city earlier. Are we
Yeah.
ready to go there?
Well, I was just going to ask you that question.
I think so.
Okay, I think our time's about gone. So, yeah, we just want to wind this up with a really, really great insight. So if nothing else made sense to you or spoke to your heart, I think this will. We started by reading Genesis 11:3, which is the first mention of brick. And bricks are mentioned twice. It says, "And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar." And then it goes on to say, "Let us make a tower and a city, and a tower that's its top will reach to heaven."
Mm-hmm. That's defiance.
That's a picture of religion, too. Mm-hmm. But now if you go to the other end of the Bible, to Revelation 21, we see stone mentioned twice in one verse. And here's the passage. I'm going to read Revelation 21, verses 10 and 11. "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God."
Instead of up from the earth.
Instead of up from the earth, with bricks made from clay, this is a city coming down out of heaven to the earth. Instead of trying to invade heaven through my own efforts, heaven is invading earth.
I love that.
Having the glory of God, its radiance like a very costly stone, like a stone of jasper, clear as crystal.
So beautiful.
So stone is mentioned twice here at the end of the Bible, as bricks are mentioned twice near the beginning of the Bible. Bricks are opaque, they're dead, and you pile them up, and you try to make them as high as you can.
And you live like a slave.
It ended in total, utter failure.
Right.
God says, no. I'm building something out of living stones, something that's eternal and permanent. It's coming out of heaven to earth. I don't want you trying to evade heaven under your own efforts. How about if you put your faith in the chief cornerstone that many of the builders have rejected, and trust in him, rest in him, and I'm going to build you into something that's amazing and incredible, and we're going to invade the earth with an eternal structure. And of course, then later it says the kings of the earth will bring their glory into the city.
And that's the kind of unity we all are hungering and yearning for, because we know that's why we're created. That's what we're created for.
Right.
But it's not going to happen perfectly until the point in time that you just described.
Right.
But in the meantime, he requires us and calls us and invites us to begin to practice this.
Yeah. Because, as you go on in this chapter 21 of Revelation, this new Jerusalem descending out of heaven from God, it's described as a bride. And then the angel speaking to John says, "Come, let me show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." And he watches and describes this new Jerusalem. The city is the bride, made of living stones, stones that over lifetimes have been shaped by our stonemason, Yeshua. He's making for himself a bride without spot or wrinkle. And he's not interested in our own efforts trying to build a tower out of clay, which comes out of a mold.
Right.
He's not interested in making us clones. His program is to build a bride, and then for this bride to come and dwell with him forever. What an amazing, incredible picture.
I know, and I hope that other people are as inspired and encouraged and reminded of what life can and should be, as we've been, as we've been talking about these things and reading about these things. So let's be more stone-like and less brick-like.
And you're reading my mind. It's like, don't be afraid to be an individual.
Yes.
Let God make you into an individual, but make
surrender.
Sure it's an individual shaped by him.
Yes.
As a disciple of Yeshua.
Yield with love to one another. Yes.
And we'll all be different, but we'll all fit together just right.
Oh, we all want that. We're just so lousy at doing it under our own steam. Yeah.
That's right. Oh, this has been fun.
It has. It's good to be back.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed this. I don't know if the people listening will, but I've had a good time.
Oh, well, we'll hopefully be back sooner rather than later, and we wish you all shalom.
Shalom and God bless.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.